Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's edition of the Gamut Network. I really love this woman so much who we are going to interview today. She has been in my life now for a couple of years and has served as an unbelievable support, mentor, partner in the journey of adaptive clothing. And she has been a trailblazer in her own right in the academic forum, and that's why I was really excited to have her on the show, because she has a completely fresh perspective, very educated knowledge on why adaptive has got to be a part of the fashion conversation. So with that, welcome Professor Kerri McBee-Black, my dear friend. How are you?
I'm good, Mindy. How are you?
So happy to have you on the show. Can you, I do want to start first with your background pre what you're doing now, because I think that's really essential to the story.
Okay, so pre what I'm doing now, wow, how far back can I go? That's probably not a good question to ask. So I have been in academia for about 11 years now, and originally was not doing research in any area, quite honestly, was focusing on teaching, but got involved with a research partner in the School of Health Professions on our campus. And our original conversation was surrounding, this was right about the time that you were doing what you were doing, right? But you and I didn't know each other at the time, but it was that same time period where you were going through your kind of investigation and knowledge in research building of your own. I was simultaneously doing the same thing. So that's
wild. And we didn't even know each other. It's so interesting. So we're talking like 2013, 14, yes. Around
yes.
there. Okay,
yes.
Great.
And so when my research colleague and I, Allison, met, our original conversation was around using RFID, radio frequency identification devices, like they use in like IDs where you scan it to gain entry someplace. That's an RFID tag that's embedded into that product. We were thinking, wouldn't it be amazing if we could have that type of technology embedded into clothing to help track people, specifically children with autism or people living with Alzheimer's, because both of those populations have a tendency to wander. And when they wander, they often don't either know how to get back, so someone with Alzheimer's, or in the case of people with autism, research was showing that they are, and there's still a lot of research out there about it, but they don't, they are attracted to bodies of water. So they have a higher drowning rate than other populations of people. And so they wander and find themselves in perilous situations. And so we were like, this is a brilliant idea. We're going to solve the world's problems by just putting these tracking devices. And this is before anybody was doing this. So this was like early on. So we held our first focus group, and we, as good researchers do, left our questions very open-ended, because you don't know what you're going to find, just as you realized when you were doing your research. So you start asking questions.
And in some cases, how wrong I was.
Which is what
I thought was so fascinating. I thought my idea was brilliant, and then they quickly shared with me that it was not.
That's just what happened to us. So we're like, look at this brilliant idea we have, and they're like, yeah, that's kind of cool, but let us tell you that we can't even find clothes for our child to go to school. We can't find clothes to go to a job interview. And I'm sitting there in this room, having had previous fashion experience, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But for example, there was a parent who has a child that has a spinal cord injury, and it's high enough up that she has to have external medical devices that help her throughout the day. And so the mother was talking about having to completely disrobe her child in public to be able to get access to some of these medical devices. So I had no idea what that was like. So I was asking questions, and I quickly was sitting there in this room. I said this to myself, I didn't say it out loud. I'm like, I could put a buttonhole in that garment and fix that problem. Like a buttonhole. Like, why have we not put thought into simple ways that we can solve these problems? So it blew my mind, first of all, that nobody in the industry was doing that. Like, why? So then Alice and I completely regrouped, and then that's what started our journey, which is now my life passion. Like, I will never not be researching this population of people and this issue. So That's like the precursor in terms of my research. But in terms of my background with fashion, I was a fashion design student back in the late 80s, early 90s. And like the traditional fashion school where it's art focused and you do fashion shows and you create product just like you did.
Yeah.
And wanted so badly to be this avant-garde type of designer that had these, ostentatious ideas, and tried so hard to fit myself into that mold and realized that's not who I am as a designer. I'm a more traditional, what I call meat and potatoes type of designer, which is what the majority of our industry is. And fell in love with children's wear. And so that was my focus through design school, was children's wear. And at the time when I graduated from our program, I had the biggest collection in the history of the program. So I had 28 individual pieces in my senior collection, which was, I don't know how I survived. Like I must have not slept my entire senior year, but I went to work for William Carter Company that makes all the little baby clothes. Went to work for them as a designer, assistant designer, and then eventually moved into a merchandising position and fell in love with the merchandising end of the business, because back then there was no, all of the Carter's production was all domestic. They didn't do any overseas production at the time. So all of our production was in South Georgia. So I got to go weekly to all of our production facilities and manage, strike-offs and managing, sample prototype development, and fell in love with all that piece of it. And so that prompted me to go back to school, get my master's degree to gain that knowledge. Then I went back into the industry and worked as a production manager and managed production for a company for several years before I left the industry and moved into social services. And so I say now that my research focus marries my passion and love and interest in the fashion industry with my social service type of passion and drive that I had as well. So I found the perfect fit with my research.
Absolutely. Now, in your time in the industry, had you ever heard about even the phrase adaptive clothing? Were there ever discussions about people with disabilities? I mean, I know in my experience and over 20 years of working in the industry, never once. I had never heard of this adaptive clothing until Oliver came into my life.
Never heard of it. Never had anybody have a conversation with me about, I don't have anybody in my family, in my immediate circle that lives with a disability. So I didn't have that knowledge, even on a personal level. No, there was never. I mean, in all the different facets that I was involved in, there was never that conversation. And when I started the research, I didn't know what to call it. I had no idea. So I had to educate myself initially, Allison and I both did, to even know what these words were called and what you found out is like, well, surely to God, somebody's doing something in the industry and I'll find out what that is. And then realize nobody's doing it.
It wasn't even conceivable that nobody had done anything remotely stylish or fashionable for the population of people with disabilities. But what I love so much about your story specifically is that you don't have a personal connection.
Yeah.
Because that is such evidence that you don't need to have a personal connection to be aware of the enormity of this population, of the spending power of this population, and the fact that this is a business opportunity, and something that as a world, as a culture, that if we want to talk about being inclusive in the industry, that they're missing out on the largest minority on the planet. So as you started to get involved in your research, and you were still at that time at University of Missouri?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So as you started to get deeper into the research, what were, let's say, the top 5 things that like blew your mind of what you were learning about, the population, whether that was from your focus groups or your research? What do you think those were?
Top 5. So I'd say the first thing was what I mentioned in terms of like the buttonhole fix. I realized that it didn't take grandiose high technology fixes to be able to provide clothing options for people living with disability that would give them everyday access. Like, it doesn't have to be difficult and complex, simple things. If you know enough about textiles and construction techniques as a designer, you can implement really simple tips or tricks or construction seam styles, for example, or stitch styles that can fix a lot of problems. That was one of the top 5. The other one was the knowledge that caregivers have in the experience of someone with a disability. I had not thought about that, and because Allison, my research partner, had worked in the health industry before, she had that knowledge that caregivers are just as critical to the conversation as the person, whether it's the patient or the family member or whatever it is. So she had the wherewithal to say, let's open up our population and invite caregivers into our conversation. And so their knowledge was phenomenal from the perspective, similar to what you found out through your research, of the donning and doffing, taking things on and taking things off, and the complexity that often goes into that experience, which can also be easily fixed, doesn't have to be super complex, but it was not something that was even in my wheelhouse. I had not even ever conceptualized what that was like. So that was number 2. Number 3 was realizing that even though there's a diversity among the disability population in terms of the types of disabilities that people or live with, that there are commonalities in terms of how we can fix some of the issues, right? Like, just because someone is using a wheelchair with a spinal cord injury doesn't mean that someone who uses crutches may not have a similar experience that could be accommodated through clothing, right? So that was a big one. I think that's number 3. Number 4, the realization, one of the big ones for me was that people with disabilities were choosing. They didn't want to have to choose, but were choosing to not participate in certain social situations, all because of their lack of access to appropriate, what they defined as appropriate clothing. So I heard
that needs to be like underscored, highlighted, starred.
Yes.
Doesn't that say it all?
That's what got me really jazzed up. Really got me mad. First of all, it got me very, very angry. I was like, how do we have a situation in the world right now where people are saying, I'd love to go to a party. I'd love to apply to this job. I heard one of the first focus groups we did was a young woman who had just recently graduated from college. She had experience in banking and finance and wanted to apply to a job in a bank, but knew that the dress code that would be required would be so restrictive that she would not be able to be independent at the job. And she's independent in every other aspect of her life. She doesn't need anybody to help care for her every day. And she did not want to have an attendant or a caregiver with her at work to be able to just function in her job.
So the clothing was actually serving as a barrier to life, in a life that already was challenging in a world that wasn't built for people with disabilities. So now we have one more, and actually probably one of the most important things, as clothing is a basic need, one of the basic needs was not accessible.
No, and what people with disability had access to, there were clothing items out there. So it wasn't that nothing existed, but what was out there they didn't want. So people were creating clothing for people, a population of people, and the people in that population were like, okay, thank you, but we don't like that. Like, this is not what we like. We want to be fashionable and trendy. We want to feel professional. We don't want to wear house dresses and house coats and Velcro laden stuff. We want to look like everybody else looks, because like you just said, we already are stigmatized because we live with a disability.
Absolutely.
And that's what really set it off for me, was the whole society, what I call the societal barrier, the fact that clothing is a societal barrier for a population of people who are already stigmatized and isolated from the environment just in and of itself, right? So I don't know if that was 5, but those were the things that really set me off and will live with me forever after just those. That was just the initial first focus group. That was all I experienced from the first focus group.
So now you are 11 years in.
Yeah.
and making this your primary focus. We thankfully have been able to work together. One of the things that I was so fascinated about when I first met you was, again, I didn't even know research like this was being done at a university level. And I feel fairly sure in saying that the industry doesn't necessarily know that this type of research is at their fingertips. And one aspect that, I'm still trying to work diligently on is bridging that gap, in that you have worked so hard and have so much knowledge on adaptive clothing and the why and the how and the financials behind this, all that is at the fingertips of this industry, of the fashion industry. Why do you think that there is the gap? Why is there a gap?
I don't know if I have the right answer, but here's my theory. I think that a couple of things. I think that the industry, having worked in it like you and I have, is so hyper-focused on the next collection, the next season, next season, next season. You're overlapping seasons as you work, and it's just this hyper-focused work constantly. I tell my students all the time, if you're looking for a job that when you show up to work that day, 900 different things are going to fall on your plate that you could have never even anticipated the day before, then you're in the right industry, because it changes like this, right? And that's the beauty and the horrible part of our industry. And I think that in the industry, we get so focused on what we know will sell, what we know about our brand, that deviating from that they think is costly, right? Trying to invest in knowledge about a new market of people, target market or market segment, seems overwhelming when it's already a struggle to stay competitive in our industry doing what we know how to do, right? Like, I already know how to do this.
Doing over and over and over and over.
I'm Gap. I know what Gap customers want. I can do that with my, eyes closed. Why do I want to try to figure out something new? And then I think there's also an aspect of it, and this is kind of a myth, that any kind of deviation from the standard consumer fit and size is seen as a costly endeavor and enterprise, right? Like, it's going to cost me so much money. I'm going to have to customize for the plus market, or I'm going to have to customize for this market. And I think that what we've heard for so many years, and that's what I found out when I first started asking around, like, why is the industry ignoring this? The first and automatic response was, because we think it's too costly. So I think within terms of academics in the industry, I don't think the industry sees that what we're doing can be inserted into their work. Or I don't think they understand that we can work in tandem, right? So the first thing that I just said, which is it's really costly to invest in understanding about a new consumer. Well, guess what, industry? Academic researchers are looking for new research projects all the time. Let us do the research for you. All you have to let go of is the ability for us to publish our findings, which we can do that in a way that does not, let go of any of your intellectual property. It does not let go of any of your, internal insight about how your business works. We don't want to give the world your secrets about how you do business. We want to be able to gain insight and educate the world about this issue within this industry, right? And give access, in this case, give access to more people. And in turn, that industry is going to gain knowledge that's going to earn them better profits, and it's going to give them better access to their consumers. So I think it's ignorance in the most positive way, right? When I say ignorant, I don't mean it in a negative way. I mean it as you just don't know what you don't know. And we as researchers, let's be honest, we're kind of geeky, nerdy people. We don't often know. I'm a cool, geeky, nerdy person.
Yes, extremely.
We don't often know how to interact with the industry. Quite honestly, a lot of people in academia go straight from bachelor's degree to master's degree to PhD. They never work out in the real world, right? In our discipline, the textile apparel discipline, many of us worked in the industry before we came into academia. So we have knowledge of what happens in that industry, or we have connections. And I think we have to, as academics, get more comfortable reaching out, which is what I did with you. Like, I just completely just like stalked you and like, hey lady, you need to know of me because I got this really cool idea and I want to know more about you. That was it. That was how, and you were willing to at least have a conversation with me, right? Like, you didn't know anything about my history, my background. All you knew was that there was somebody else out there in the world that was working on a topic that you've been spending your life working on, and let's see what that person has to say. So it's, you know, the ability to take a risk, I think, is difficult for both the industry and for academia because we get complacent in what we know.
Well, let's hope that, you know, our viewers who are watching this understand the power of research and how helpful it can be to the industry and marrying the disciplines and
Yep.
supporting each other. You also just had a very exciting year. You are a 2020 graduate.
I am.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I have been in academia for 11 years, but I only had my master's degree and was doing just teaching. But 5 years ago, started a journey to complete my PhD. So I continue to work full time, have a husband and a son, and take classes and do research part time. And so that finally culminated with finishing my dissertation and defending my dissertation in April. And so in May, I was officially granted my PhD hood and am now officially PhD. So yeah, 2020 graduate during COVID, like how better could that be, right?
Exactly. I have a senior in my household right now. So I think you guys are the chosen ones. But congratulations. It is so exciting. The hard work, the dedication that you have put into this. It'll be my life goal to make sure that it is seen and absorbed and read and utilized. And if people have more questions or want to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
The best way is to email me, I think. And my email address is McBeeBlack, so McBee-Black K @missouri.edu. It's really simple. It's really easy. I am on social media. So I have an Instagram account and I have a Facebook account. Somebody could look me up that way. I think my handle on both of those social media platforms is K McBee 1971. So you can search for me that way and we can become friends on social media. But email, I'm on all the time. So that's really the best way.
Perfect. Now, before we go, and I'm really excited to hear what your answer is going to be. We here at the show are big believers in the power of a vision board and putting your hopes and dreams and wishes and who you want to meet and what you want to accomplish in either an actual board or in your head and your heart. Yes. If we got to look at Kerri McBee-Black's vision board, what would we see?
Well, I've already accomplished one of my items on my vision board, and that was connecting with you. That was something that I'd wanted to do from the beginning of my research. When I found out, seriously, I'm not just saying that, when I found out when Tommy Hilfiger's line hit, I was like, this is somebody I got to know. So that one's been accomplished. If the other thing on my vision board, believe it or not, there's two other things. One thing would be that we get to a point, like the industry is inclusive. Like there is no need to continue to educate about marginalized populations, whether it's disability community, any other community, right? So a fashion industry that gets it, that understands that there's a wide variety of consumers out there. And the third thing is that I have a clear vision at the end of my career that I want to be recognized as someone who gave everything that they could to the disability movement within adaptive apparel and inclusive design. Like that is, if I can't be remembered for that when I'm done doing what I'm doing, then I've somehow failed, because that's where it is for me.
And I believe that you are already on that path. So that one will be a check as well. It was so wonderful to have you on the show. I love seeing you. Congratulations on your hood, on your officialness, and we're so proud of you. Can't wait to have you as a household name in the adaptive movement.
Well, Thank you, Mindy, and the feeling is mutual. I'm so appreciative of the work that you've done, and I appreciate your willingness to just continue to work with people and collaborate with us. It makes all the difference in the world.
Thank you. If you would like to be on the Gamut Network, please email us at talent@gamutmanagement.com to tell us why you'd be a great guest. Please also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel at the Gamut Network, as well as follow us on social media at Gamut Management. Thank you.
Thanks, Mindy.
Bye.
Bye.